Hello, and welcome back for another edition of the AI Insiders Podcast, flagship podcast of low rank adaptation and 2-bit quantization. And to those of you in the know, that means we do more with less. And we love that for ourselves. Hi, I'm Adam Russell, the director of the AI division at University of Southern California's Information Science Institute, and I'm your host for the AI Insiders, where I get the privileged chance to talk to the pretty unique humans we have here at ISI, who could be doing anything really, anywhere, and instead are working on, with, and around AI at ISI. So in effect, I get a chance to help humanize AI a bit more. And I call it a privilege because it really is just that. I get this chance to not only explore my current hypothesis that better understanding AI means better understanding the humans behind AI, but I also get to actually do that by asking somewhat insane questions. So why would anyone come on the show to face such a barrage of insane questions? Well, one idea is they actually don't know better. The other is that they know exactly what they're getting into, and they find the courage anyway to press on in the service of helping me to humanize AI, and ideally to do more better for more of us. One such courageous person today is my guest, Justin Cho. Now, Justin is a PhD candidate at the University of Southern California with ISI. We will dig deeper into what that's like, why he's getting a PhD, what he wants to do next, but more importantly, Justin, welcome to AI Insiders.
Hi, thank you for having me here.
Good. So I gave you your heads up. Let's get right to your origin story.
Perfect.
The way I start is I ask you to go back in time and talk to your 10-year-old self and explain what you're doing now at ISI and why you're doing it.
Yeah, the 10-year-old version of myself is someone who's really quite just obedient. I don't know if it's a very an Asian kind of culture where I just like sort of do what my parents say, and I wasn't the kind to sort of question anything. Yeah, so if I were to tell him anything, I think he would just take it as like face value. And so I want to be very careful with the words that I put together. And I think I would say something along the lines of what sort of John said in a previous episode about talking to computers. I think the whole like process of getting into NLP was actually from science fiction, where I watched movies like Her or Interstellar. Those are more recent ones, but like in general, just like interfacing with very smart, intelligent kind of systems and being able to do more with ourselves was just so inspiring and interesting. What is intelligence? These kind of questions. I was very a sentimental sort of like more philosophical kind of kid when I was younger. I was just like, why do we live? Why am I born into this world? Am I anything special? And these kind of things. And so intelligence is very strongly tied to that, right? And so I think just thinking about that, I'll just tell him, yeah, you're studying what intelligence is about, talking to computers, and trying to make positive impact in the world.
Okay, so we'll go down that route a little bit, but for our listeners, just to remind them, so the episode you referenced was with Jonathan May, Dr. John May, who's at ISI, who's your supervisor, right? Your
Yes,
PhD.
exactly.
And unpacking a little bit, NLP stands for natural language processing, which is basically, the origin in many cases of what we're seeing now with like large language models, and it's the idea of how do we get machines to sort of understand and work with language.
Exactly.
So let's dive right into this then, and let me ask, like, what are you most worried about in our future with AI?
I so I know a lot of people don't like this kind of doomsday talk about AI taking over jobs and everything, but it is true. I think what's true is that it's not AI taking over human jobs, but it's more like one person becoming more super capable. Like that has a lot of implications. I think there will be a lot of people displaced with jobs that they find are meaningful. I think being prepared for that is super important. Yeah, I think just yeah, I'm actually super worried. Yeah, people are becoming more immersed into consumption, but then feel I think most satisfaction usually comes like more long-term satisfaction comes from production. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
the tendency of society right now is being pushed towards endless consumption, mindless consumption, and that could lead to, depression or whatever, like wide scale depression, especially when people get out of jobs and they're not producing for themselves, at least even with like basic money, is super concerning.
Yeah, that's I think we would both acknowledge like the degrees of uncertainty in our predictions about the future are huge, right? It comes with
Right.
an enormous error
Of
bar. So
course.
I'm not asking you to predict the future, but you make an excellent point, which is the focus on in some cases like happiness leads to things like consumption and short-term goals. But your point about fulfillment, right?
Hmm.
The act of production, that really fulfillment is one of the things that is probably the most riskier. Okay, so that's the doomsday. Well, not doomsday, but those are negative consequences. Tell me why AI is going to keep that from happening. How are we going to build the AI that prevents that outcome and leads us to abundance?
I don't think it would be AI itself that keeps us from that kind of scenario. It would be
We
it
can't
would.
rely on technology to solve all of our problems. Fair point.
I think it will have to come within us. Like we have to communicate within us to sort of educate ourselves on like thinking of AI as tools that are accessible for everyone. The idea is to feel empowered by these tools to be able to do things that you find fulfilling, that you previously thought was beyond your capabilities. And I think that's the more positive kind of future that, or the optimistic future that I look into, where everybody finds their path to fulfillment with things by being empowered by AI
Hmm.
instead of being just replaced by it.
I like that. Like I said, I use this term apocalyptimism because
Hmm.
I feel like there's no middle ground. It's probably not true, but yeah, I like that these inputs because they push me more towards the optimistic side. But given the wide distribution of potential futures, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of questions about what do we sort of do next in the relatively short time. And I say that as your senior by many years, the relatively short time you spent in AI. Where have you had to update most? Like what has surprised you most, or you
Mm.
have found most counterintuitive about your work in AI?
Yeah, so this is sort of a maybe a sad story, but I started out mainly liking working on dialogue research. Was a part that I was most interested in trying to enhance in NLP models. And so I got into dialogue research and I thought, oh, dialogue is a very challenging problem. Carrying on a conversation without like a very open-ended without about anything seems to be sort of like touching on AGI and like something very challenging and appealing. And it turned out that large scale pre-training with some kind of dialogue formatted data was sort of sufficient. Like when ChatGPT came out, I was just absolutely blown away, especially as a person who was working on dialogue. It almost felt like my field was somewhat like already complete in a way. And that way I sort of had to try to pivot and also like relearn or try to take a new perspective into, okay, what is conversation? Deep down, it's more about common ground building, world building together, understanding the world better through these conversations. And I think those are more higher order kind of objectives now that we're moving towards. And so it was a sad moment, but I think it was a good kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people in LP. Like, well, I guess we're out of a job. And then, as you point out, yeah, it's interesting because there are people who felt like the proof there was like scaling will solve it, and we're actually not as complicated creatures as we think, right? That
Hmm.
maybe we really are ourselves sort of stochastic parrots.
Hmm.
But yeah, I've been tracking as you know,
Mm.
as we've dug deeper and scratched past the surface and realized that yeah, the point of dialogue is you and I are actually literally constructing something new in the world, right?
Hmm.
And so there's reason for it. We still need you, Justin. Don't give up.
For sure, for sure.
So let's say AI didn't exist. What would you be doing?
That's a good question. I actually started off college as a chemical engineering and a business major. And for the first 2 years, I studied that before going to the military in Korea and then realizing that I didn't want to work in a factory out in the middle of nowhere. And one thing that I wanted to work on was, okay, maybe consulting would be kind of interesting.
Mhm.
So I did an internship in consulting. And then during the consulting internship, I found out about self-driving cars. And I was making PowerPoint slides about self-driving cars and how they're going to like change the industry, whatever, and whatnot. And I realized, why am I making PowerPoint slides for this when I can actually be trying to, well, I thought I was technical enough to try to contribute to AI. And that's when I shifted like, oh, I have to get into AI and shifted into computer science major and do whatever. So if that wasn't there, I think maybe I would have stayed in consulting because I think the idea of like being able to talk to executive level people, even as like an entry level job position, is super rare and valuable. I think there's a lot of transferable skills between like business and research where you like come up with the right questions and answer them and iterate, experiment. And so I think it would have just been a different pathway in that direction.
That is a pretty interesting story. We haven't spent a lot of time in your actually biography, but you so you're
Hmm.
from Korea. Where'd you go to undergraduate?
I did my undergrad in Hong Kong in a university called Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. My background is a bit unique in that I was born in the States, so I'm technically American as well. But my dad is a Korean diplomat. So that means I've moved around every 2 to 3 years. So I've lived in a whole bunch of different places. So prior to Hong Kong, I was in the United Arab Emirates where I graduated from high school. And before that, I was back in Korea. But before that, yeah, a bunch of different countries like Austria, Russia, Norway. I think it's fair to say I had my fair share of international exposure.
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar itinerary background because of diplomatic background. So I hear you. The hardest question I sometimes get is, where did you grow up? And you think like, oh, when
Yeah,
when do you grow up? I guess the
on
question,
Earth.
but yeah, on Earth. So is that how you think about it? Like, where did you grow up? I grew up on Earth, or do you feel like you belong, you're citizens in the world as a result of this experience? Or
That's a very difficult question, I think, which I struggle with a lot, my identity. I think I've met someone, yes, a few years ago in ISI who was an intern. I think his name was Dennis, who's at University of Edinburgh now. But when I asked him, where are you from? Like, what country are you from? And he's like, I'm a global citizen. I'm from the
Mm,
world. And that really shocked me as like an answer that you would give. And he wasn't like being pretentious or anything. That's what he like genuinely believed. And I thought that was a much better answer than me saying, I'm Korean, but I also am American, but I've never really lived in the US until I was like 20. And like this long-winded way of like saying I don't really belong anywhere, but I do belong to this world. So yeah, I really like that answer. So like I would consider myself like a global citizen, but obviously that doesn't mean I understand like every different kind of demographic in this world, but I'm trying to do so and actively don't try to administer myself to a particular agenda of a single country, but rather more about like I know this is a very lofty kind of thing to say, but like I want to be more on the side of humans rather than a particular group of humans.
where's your family right now?
My parents are in Kazakhstan. My dad is it's his final position before I think he retires. So
Oh
yeah,
man.
yeah.
All right. So given all the hype and hubbub and yeah, I think reasonable excitement, sometimes over indexed hype and the AI, what do
Mhm.
they think about what you're doing?
I'm actually curious too because I think it's been part of like my family culture, which might need some fixing is that we don't talk too much about what we do for our professions. I know my dad's a diplomat, but I don't really understand what that entails. And my dad knows that I'm a PhD student, working on something in AI. But I feel like my parents don't have a tech, like they're not engineers, they're not scientists. Like I think a lot of actual people who are doing their PhDs right now actually come from, which makes it a bit more difficult. The bridge between the gap between their understanding of the world and mine is quite big. And
Yeah.
so they sort of like, oh, you're working on something technical, and they're working on something more political science or international
Hmm.
relations. So it's completely something dealing directly with humans versus I'm always trying to talk to computers is a big big gap. Yeah.
Yeah, although you're going to meet in the middle at some point, right? Because I
Right,
think like
right.
yeah, but it's true. I mean, at some point, yeah, you're just son and he's dad and dad and
Right,
mom, right?
right.
And that's
Yeah.
fine.
I
Yeah.
wonder if I can ask a question to you, actually,
Mm.
like what do your children think about what you do? Or
Yeah.
what do they think that you do? How do you explain it?
That's yeah. Okay, so we're in the process. So full disclosure, my kids are 7 and one's about to turn 4, two girls. And but is a very open and I think important question. Like, well, so how do I get them to think about this stuff? And part of it is I have them go online to, for example, character.ai. I have them engage with the interface, and we talk about
That's awesome.
that's not really Wonder Woman. Yeah, that's not really a person, and getting them to understand how that works. Also, appreciating what they can do with it.
Yeah, no, well, I think it's always super interesting to ground yourself based on the sort of main upcoming technology of our times when we were younger. So like
Mhm.
when I was younger, like I'd look at TV or color TV or whatever, and I'd be like, things that are happening on the screen, they're not actually happening behind this metal box.
Right.
It's like something that's recorded, and like you have to wrap your mind around that, right? And a lot of people, had a hard time first time. And so even with AI now, like it's obviously something's talking to me, but it's not a real human being. And I think the level of abstraction of human intelligence into something, I know it's completely like having something pre-recorded and just playing it versus something lively interact with you is
Mm.
completely something different. But I feel like it is becoming more and more challenging for people growing up to decide on what to trust and what to not trust.
Let's start getting into the like really insane questions, if you don't mind. So,
Oh, yeah, I
insane
love
question
those.
number one. Let's say AI has developed sentience, or there's a sentient AI.
Mhm.
You have been elected by the species to go to this AI and present a cultural artifact of some sort, song, movie, book, whatever. That you go to the AI and ask, like, if you want to understand humans or have a
Mm.
better understanding of humans, here, ingest this. This would give you some insight into sort of the complicated creatures that we are.
Oh man, that's I think the first thing that came to my mind was this is very pop culture, but
I love
Dune
it.
2, Dune 2, I watched it recently.
Yes.
I say Dune 2 not just because I think I would pair Dune 2 or the Dune series that came out so far with the documentary that came along with it of how they created the movies. It's just like the level of thought and professionalism that went into the creative process is something I think just like is so inspiring. And like being completely transported into this entire new world and believing it, being immersed into it, and just being so like resonating with the emotions while capturing some essence of like human nature despite being a completely different planet, I think was beautiful to show them that we created this beautiful thing. Just I don't know, like beat this, like try this.
Beat this.
Yeah.
No, but it's true because there is some element of almost magic there, right? How
Mhm.
does that work? How can we do these things?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it goes back to, yeah, again, our what some have said is that our secret to our success is our ability to create things that aren't real, but we can treat as if they're real, right? For a moment.
Right.
Um, what do you think is the most misunderstood concept in AI?
Most misunderstood. I think all the talk about AI just replacing us is just the most misunderstood. It's
That's
I
fair.
know we talked about this already, but just humans, it's going to be another human. That's because it also ties back to about like machines are very unlikely to develop intent, or we're probably going to push against at least that part, even if it is possible, hopefully, because of
Mm.
its implications. So it's usually going to be humans. So watch out for the other human, I guess, or watch it. Let's just be like a vigilant about one another in terms of that, and like not try to blame the tech itself, but like try to seek what's behind the human intent that leads to negative outcomes.
Yeah. At some point, Gerald Weinberg was said that,
Mm.
no matter what they tell you the problem is, it's always a human problem,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is, yeah, it's very true. Hey, Justin, it looks like we're running out of time. It has been fantastic having you on the podcast and talking to you about all these cool things. Again, I could
Mm-hmm.
spend hours pulling these like philosophical strings with you. We have seen your courage in terms of like being willing to even question like why you're doing this stuff. And then, as if that weren't evidence enough, you had the courage to come on this podcast. So I am really excited about, your future and helping however I can to help you continue to develop into, I think, what will be a very important leader in this area. So it is my pleasure and privilege to work with you at SI. And I thank you again for coming on the podcast.
No, I appreciate that. And I also want to just echo again that I really appreciate what you're doing here. ISI is like the atmosphere here has changed a lot since you've come, and it's just been more exciting to have these kind of avenues to communicate with you.
That's well, I'll take that for a win, and I appreciate it. Hey, if you enjoy these short podcasts, please do that thing. Like us, give us the stars, many stars, even more stars. No, keep going, more stars, and subscribe. Spread the word. Send us feedback. Offer us up more questions, and of course, just keep listening and learning. And then join us, please, again for another episode of AI Insiders, where we'll continue to navigate our way through this weird, weird world, trying to do what humans do best when they face these kinds of challenges, working together as if all our lives depend on each other, because they do. So for now, for the future, fight on.